They left a helpless girl tied up in a sack to die. And then the cowboy's little girl whispered, "Papa, that's my mama." Western Wyoming, early fall, 1892. The sun climbed up pale and thin, shining through a haze of red and gold leaves. The air had that sharp bite that warns of frost. In the small frontier town of Red Willow, the streets were quiet before daylight. A little way past town sat Jack Rollins's small ranch, tucked where sagebrush met scrub pine. Jack rode slow along a ragged fence, checking the rails one by one. He was 33, lean and steady, a man shaped by wind and sun. Since his wife died, he spoke little and kept to himself, raising his daughter, Suddy, in quiet ways. Suddy was 4. She walked beside the horse, her tiny boots crunching the cold dust. Her breath puffed in little clouds. They came to a cluster of tall sycamores, their yellow leaves trembling. Under one twisted trunk lay a lump half covered in leaves and roots. Jack pulled his horse to a stop. Suddy gripped the reins with both hands and went still. Jack swung down, eyes narrowing. The shape was an old burlap sack, stained and worn. He pushed aside leaves and saw dark patches on a cloth. Blood. His heartbeat quickened. He folded back the mouth of the sack and looked inside. His breath caught. A young woman lay there, limp, wrists tied, bruises blooming on her face and arms. Her hair was tangled. Her skin was pale. Someone had tossed her there like trash. Suddy stood behind Jack, fingers pressed to her lips. Jack's pulse pounded in his ears. Then Suddy's small voice, urgent and sure, broke the silence. "Papa, she's my mama." Jack froze. He stared at his daughter, then at the stranger. For a heartbeat, the stories he'd told Suddy of her mother and the faint bits Suddy still held in her mind ran together. The woman's dark hair, the soft curve of her lashes, the idea of gentle hands. Suddy believed she saw the mother she barely remembered. Jack's jaw tightened. He slid his coat under the woman so she wouldn't rest on splintered wood. He lifted her carefully. Suddy climbed up behind him and hid her face against his back. They rode slow toward the house. News traveled fast. By midday, neighbors drifted over, leaning on the fence and trading whispers. Mrs. Turner came first. Jack Rollins, bringing in strays again, this time not calves, but trouble, someone muttered. Jack carried the woman into the barn and set her on a spare mattress. Suddy stood close, white-faced and watchful. A man at the doorway called, "You found her in a sack? That's bad business. Hand her over to the law." Jack turned, voice low and steady. "She's not awake. None of you have heard a word from her. Don't condemn someone who can't even speak for herself." Murmurs rolled through the crowd. Some shifted on their boots. A man spat into the dirt. Jack said nothing more. He shut the barn doors. Inside, he lit a lantern, washed her bruises with gentle water, and tucked blankets around her. Suddy crept to the mattress and smoothed the covers across the girl's marked arms. Outside, voices rose again. She might be an outlaw. Maybe she ran from somewhere. Jack Rollins ought to turn her in. Jack stood in the doorway, eyes on the faces beyond the gap in the boards. He kept his hands in his pockets, shoulders squared, not moving. Suddy slid behind him and wrapped both arms around his leg. By dusk, the barn had gone quiet. The stranger still lay without waking. Suddy sat at the foot of the mattress, her small doll on her lap. In the dim light she whispered, "Mama, Mama." The word hung like a prayer. Jack paced the stalls, listening to wind rattle the boards. He would not fetch the sheriff. Not yet. He would guard this girl until she opened her eyes. The town would judge, rumors would run wild. But tonight, under the same sycamores where she'd been thrown away, a broken girl lay safe beneath his roof, not a burden, but a human being who needed mercy. 2 days later, the quiet didn't last. Boots crunched on the path. A dozen townsfolk gathered at the gate, faces tight with worry and suspicion. Some leaned on posts, others crossed their arms over thick coats. In the middle stood Deputy Harmon, hat low, mouth set in a hard line. "You need to hand her over, Jack," he said. "A girl shows up beaten, stuffed in a bloody sack, and now she's living in your barn. That's a heap of trouble for one man and a little girl." Jack stood tall on the porch, arms folded. His eyes were calm, unreadable. Suddy peeked from behind his leg and gripped his pants. "She isn't even conscious," Jack said quietly. "You haven't heard her name. You haven't heard her side. Don't judge a stranger you haven't met." Mrs. Turner snapped, "Think of Suddy." "I am," he said. "And I'm thinking of that girl, too." He nodded toward the barn. The crowd grumbled. The deputy's brow furrowed, but at last he stepped back. "If anything goes wrong, you'll be held responsible." Jack gave one small nod. "Seems I always am." Inside, the barn went still again. The girl lay pale and quiet on the mattress. Near the pot-bellied stove, a small fire glowed, and the smell of warm broth drifted through the air. Jack sat with a damp cloth and wiped her brow. Suddy stood at the cot's edge, doll in hand, not speaking. That evening, the girl suddenly gasped and shot upright, eyes wide with fear. She clutched the blanket like a shield. When she saw Jack, she shrank back, breath quick and thin. "Easy," Jack said, both hands raised. "You're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you." She looked from him to Suddy, confusion shadowing her bruised face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Her lips trembled. Jack reached into his coat and pulled out a folded cloth, pale blue, the stitching old, but neat. He set it close to her. "This belonged to my wife," he said. "It's clean. Feels like peace to me. You don't have to remember everything right now. Just hold on to one thing. You're alive, and that matters." The girl took the handkerchief slowly, hugged it to her chest, and turned on her side. Jack stood and moved to the door, leaving Suddy there, beside her. That night, Suddy sat near the cot, legs tucked under. Firelight brushed the girl's face. Suddy leaned in and touched the girl's sleeve with one finger. "Mama," she whispered so soft it was almost air. "Mama, you're home." The girl didn't open her eyes, but tears gathered and shone. Morning came. The girl was awake but quiet. Jack kept a little distance, leaving a tin mug of warm water and a plate of soft bread. Suddy brought a small wooden brush and handed it over without a word. Later, when the sunlight slid in through the high window, Suddy sat on the floor and asked, "What's your name?" The girl shook her head. I don't know." Suddy studied the tangle of dark hair, where the firelight caught red. "Rosie," she said. "Like the flowers Mama used to press in her book. Your hair looks like that." The girl blinked, surprised. "Rosie." Suddy nodded. "Yes, Rosie." From the doorway, Jack heard and did not argue. He met the girl's eyes and gave a slow nod. "Rosie it is." That night, as the wind whispered along the boards, Rosie slept on her side with a blue handkerchief tucked beneath her cheek. Suddy curled beside her and whispered again, "Mama." Rosie let the tears slide into the pillow. She didn't correct the child. Days turned to a quiet routine. The plains rolled out gold under a sky the color of old tin. Jack stood beside Clover, a steady chestnut mare, reins loose in his hand. Rosie lingered at the barn door, arms crossed, one foot tracing circles in dust. "You don't have to," Jack said gently, nodding toward the saddle. Rosie shook her head. "No, I want to try." The yellow bruises on her face had faded, but shadows still lived in her eyes. Jack helped her mount, steadying her leg. "That's it," he murmured. "Let her feel you. Don't feed the fear." He led Clover at a slow, careful pace. At first Rosie's knuckles went white, but after a few minutes her grip softened. The first week, they stayed near the paddock. Jack never pushed. He walked beside her each morning, fixed the stirrups, and reminded her to breathe. Suddy followed with a basket of apples for Clover. At night, Jack pulled the chair closer to the little stove so Rosie would be warmer. He cleaned her cuts with patient hands and never asked about the old scars. In the mornings, fresh hot water steamed in the tin basin by her bed. Of the 2 mugs in the house, he always gave her the porcelain one with faded bluebirds, his wife's old cup. One day, she found her torn gloves sewn with new thread. When she looked at Jack, he only shrugged. "Tore easy," he said. Rosie started pitching in with simple chores, gathering eggs, brushing Clover's coat. Jack let her set the pace. Suddy trailed after, talkative and bright, chattering about stars and odd dreams. Rosie listened, smiled, and answered with a few quiet words. One afternoon, Jack led Rosie past the old willow, out into a wide field where tall grass moved like waves. Clover trotted softly, and the wind lifted Rosie's hair. Suddenly she froze. Her fingers trembled on the reins. Breath stuck in her throat. Jack looked up, alert. "Rosie." Tears spilled down her cheeks before she knew they were there. She clamped a hand to her mouth. I've been here before, or somewhere like it." Her voice wavered. There was sun, grass, a man's voice. "I was on a horse. I laughed." She shook her head, overwhelmed. It was warm. Jack stepped closer, but didn't touch her. "That's something," he said softly. "A piece of the puzzle." "I don't know who I was with," she whispered, "but I felt safe." Suddy, who'd been sitting on the fence, slid down and came over. She patted Rosie's back with her tiny hand. "It's okay, Mama," she said. "I'll remember for you." Rosie looked at the child, stunned. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Jack saw the rush of feeling cross Rosie's face and turned aside to give her time. That night, Rosie sat by the fire with the mended gloves in her lap. Jack poured tea and set the cup near her. They didn't speak. The quiet felt like a blanket. The girl in the sack was fading into the past. Bit by bit, Rosie became real. Autumn deepened, nights turning cold and sharp. Wind howled through the valley as Jack raked the last coals in the hearth. Rosie slept in the cot, her leg wrapped from a fall the week before. Suddy lay beside her, hand resting lightly on Rosie's wrist. Then came a knock, firm even. Not frantic, not shy. Jack moved to the door, his revolver still in its holster, and cracked it open. A tall man stood outside, dust on his coat, a polished silver star catching the light on his chest. "Name's Darius Finch," he said. "Detective out of Cheyenne." Jack didn't move. "What brings a city badge out this far?" "Looking for a young woman," Finch said. "Name unknown. Ran from a children's home 2 weeks ago, right after it burned. Word is, she may have had a hand in the fire." Jack's eyes held steady. "Many women come through these parts," he said. "Don't turn them into criminals by guess." Finch's smile was thin. "This one fled. That says a lot." "It says she was scared," Jack grunted. "Or she's hiding something worse," Finch said, stepping closer. "If you've got a name or a face, come." "Back in daylight," Jack answered. "Not now." Finch narrowed his eyes. "I hear she's hurt. Taken in by a rancher. Widower. Has a daughter." He glanced past Jack into the dim room. "That wouldn't be you, would it?" Jack's jaw went tight. He didn't answer. Finch tipped his hat, cold smile fixed. "I'll be back with a warrant if I need to." He turned and disappeared into the trees. Jack closed the door and slid the bolt. Behind him, Rosie stirred and whispered, "Who was that?" "Nothing you need to fear," Jack said, though the edge in his voice said otherwise. The fire hissed. Suddy slept on. Rosie did not. Near midnight, the cabin lay still. Rosie slipped from the cot, careful not to wake Suddy. She found Jack's old coat and pulled on her boots. Fear pressed on her chest until it hurt. The detective's voice rang in her head. She stepped outside. The cold bit her face. Stars glittered like ice. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stay and risk bringing danger to Jack and Suddy. Behind her, Suddy woke and reached for warmth. The bed was empty. "Mama," she whispered. "Mama." Panic hit. She ran to Jack's room. "Papa, she's gone." Jack sat up fast, heart thumping. He grabbed a lantern and followed small tracks shining in the frost. "Rosie," he called into the dark. "Rosie." No answer. Suddy stumbled after him, legs shaking. The trail led to a ridge where the ground fell off into brush and broken rock. Jack held up the light and saw a crumpled shape below. He went down the slope without thinking. Rosie lay still, her leg at a wrong angle. Dirt streaked across her face, breath shallow. He knelt, gathered her gently, and felt how cold she was. Up top, Suddy sobbed. "Mama, please come back." "Stay there, honey," Jack called. "I'll bring her." It took nearly an hour to carry Rosie up. Jack's muscles burned, but he never stopped. Back inside, he set her by the fire, covered her with every blanket he owned. Suddy crawled beside Rosie and held her hand. Rosie's eyelids fluttered. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," Jack said, brushing damp hair from her face. "You came back. That's enough." Suddy leaned close. "Mama, please don't go again." Rosie didn't answer, but a single tear slid down. Outside, the wind swept the hills. Inside, for now Rosie was home. And Jack knew they were no longer just protecting a stranger. They were holding together something that felt like a family. The storm outside drifted on, but a colder one hung in the room. Rosie lay curled under layers of wool and quiet. Her lips were cracked. Her face was too pale. Jack sat near, watching firelight ripple along her skin. He still hadn't asked why she tried to leave. Not yet. Suddy sat on the steps, hugging her ragged doll, chin on her knees. Inside, Rosie stirred, eyes fluttering open. She looked around, first confused, then tense. Her hands twitched like she might run again, but her bandaged leg said otherwise. Jack noticed and moved slow. "You're safe," he said. "You're home." Her breath hitched. "I shouldn't be here." Jack poured water into a dented tin cup and handed it to her. "You shouldn't be freezing at the bottom of a ravine, either. Drink." She hesitated, then sipped. Her hands shook. Jack set the cup aside and leaned back in the chair. "I don't know what folks told you," he said, "or what you tell yourself. But I watched what you did." Rosie's eyes flicked up. "What do you mean?" "That night before you left," Jack said softly. "The creek rose from a storm. One of the colts slipped in. You hauled it out. Hurt leg and all. You didn't know anyone saw." Her mouth opened. If bad people do that," Jack said. "I haven't met them." Rosie turned her face away, shame bending her mouth. A tear tracked down her cheek. Jack reached with the same blue handkerchief and dabbed it away. "I don't care who you used to be," he said. "I only know this. Suddy trusts you." His voice wavered on that last word. Rosie broke then, small quiet sobs shaking her. Jack let her cry. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed, steady as the pine walls. Tiny footsteps crossed the floor. Suddy stood at the cot, both hands on the old doll. "Mama," she whispered. "She told me to give this to you." Rosie blinked. Suddy stepped closer and lifted the doll with care. "My mama," she said, before she went to heaven, "told me to give this to someone brave and kind." Rosie reached out as if touching something holy. Her fingers brushed the worn fabric. She caught her breath. Suddy hugged her. "That's you." Rosie held the child and the doll and shook with quiet tears. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "Maybe not, Jack said from the chair, but it's still yours. Snow fell outside, like ash. Fire crackled inside, warm and patient. For the first time since waking in a sack under the sycamore, something dangerous and beautiful moved inside Rosie. Hope. Later, Rosie sat under the cottonwood behind the barn. Her leg was healing, but her heart still hurt. The wind brushed through branches like whispers from a life she'd tried to lock away. Memories crept back whether she wanted them or not. She'd been 10 when they shipped her to Hollow Creek Orphanage, a bleak place at the edge of nowhere. Windows were cracked. Rules were colder than winter. Children never smiled. Adults spoke in orders. Years passed in that hush. Rosie kept her head down and didn't make waves. But the older she got, the more she noticed. Children vanished in the night. New ones arrived with no past and no questions. No one asked why. No one dared to. One day, while dusting in the warden's office, her fingers found a loose board behind the desk. She pulled it back and uncovered a ledger. Handwritten names, dates, careful columns, and initials she knew from roll call. Payments. Transactions. Her stomach turned. She confronted the matron. It was like lighting dry grass. They beat her and threw her in the cellar. Days later, a fire tore through the West Wing. 2 children died. The newspapers called it an accident. Rosie knew better. It was a warning. She slipped out and buried the ledger under a twisted sycamore beyond the fence. Then she ran. They caught her. They thought they'd killed her. They wrapped her in a sack and tossed her like garbage. I didn't mean to say all that, she muttered suddenly, realizing Jack stood a few steps away. She hadn't heard him come. Shame flared. I should have told you. I was afraid if you knew, you'd send me away. Jack knelt beside her. You hid the truth, he said gently, and then they tried to hide you. She looked up, tears filling her eyes. It isn't over, she said. They'll come. Jack didn't flinch. He just reached for her hand, rough and warm. He didn't say, I believe you. He didn't say, I forgive you. He held on. That was enough. The dam broke. Rosie leaned into him and cried the kind of cry that empties a soul. He held her while the trees swayed and the secrets she'd carried leaked out in ragged breaths. Inside, Suddy colored on a wooden board with broken crayons. She glanced out the window once and saw her papa and Rosie holding on to each other without words. She smiled and went back to her drawing. 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, one in the middle with curly hair and a dress. A family. Under the earth, deep among old roots, a leather book slept. Ink and paper waiting for the day Rosie would be brave enough to dig it up. For now, she had something else, a place not only to survive, but to be believed and loved. Late afternoon. Clouds heavy with a new storm. A hard knock shook the door. Jack opened slowly. 2 men stood outside, one in uniform, one with a badge on a dark vest. Their horses waited at the gate. The space between the men and Jack was cold. Jack Rollins, the officer asked. Jack nodded. We've come for the girl. My name is Rosie Bellamy. He held up papers. Warrant from the state capitol. Arson. Suspicion of manslaughter. She comes with us. Inside, Rosie froze. Her own name echoed like thunder. She had known this moment might come, but still felt the strike. Jack didn't move. You're wrong, he said quietly. That's not your call, the detective answered. If she's innocent, she can prove it in court. Jack turned to call out, but Rosie was already in the doorway behind him. Her eyes were wide but dry. There was a steadiness in her that came from too many sleepless nights. I'll go, she whispered. No, Jack said, firm. And right then a small voice broke the room in half. Wait. Suddy ran from the kitchen, boots still on, doll clutched in both hands. She planted herself between Rosie and the lawmen. She's my mama, she cried. You can't take her. Everything went still. The officers exchanged a glance. One looked away. Behind them, footsteps crunched on the road. Townspeople were coming, quiet at first, then with more strength. Men, women, children, farmers, the storekeeper, even the blacksmith's wife. They had seen the riders and followed. Rosie stood stunned. From the crowd an older woman stepped forward, silver braid down her back, cane in hand, chin raised. "I know that girl," she said. "I worked at Hollow Creek years ago. I know what they did." She pointed her cane at the detective. "That child is telling the truth." A murmur rolled through the people. Nods spread. Whispers turned into words. Words grew into something like resolve. The sheriff hesitated. "Ma'am, that's not. You'll need more than a paper to take her," the old woman snapped. Rosie looked to Jack, shaken, and found him already moving. He took her hand and, before anyone could breathe, went down on one knee. "If the law needs a voice for her, let it be mine," he said, eyes on Rosie. "If she needs protection, I'll give her my name. If she needs a future, I'll give her my life." He pulled a simple silver ring from his vest pocket, worn smooth with time. "I'm not doing this from duty. I'm doing this because I choose you." Right then, the sun slid out from the clouds and poured warm light over the hill. Rosie blinked back tears. Everything else fell away. The crowd, the lawmen, the whispers. There was only Jack on one knee, Suddy by his side, hugging her doll, and the choice in Rosie's chest. She nodded. "Yes," she breathed. A long exhale ran through the people like wind over grass. Someone clapped. A small cheer rose. Even the officer's face softened. Suddy beamed. "See? She's ours." They stood together there, not as a runaway and her keepers, but as a family, held by more than paper or records. Held by love, and by one brave little girl who had spoken the truth loud enough for everyone to hear. Winter settled in with quiet strength. Snow thinned along the ridges, and tiny green tips pushed through the hard ground like hope sneaking back after a long exile. Word spread through the territory. Bit by bit, the truth about Hollow Creek came into the open. Rosie was cleared. She didn't clap or cheer. She just breathed for the first time in years. The investigation widened like cracks in ice. People spoke up. Old workers, a drifter who hauled supplies, a woman who washed linens. One by one, they told what they'd seen. The leather book Rosie had hidden under the twisted sycamore held names and dates that matched children who had vanished and money that had changed hands. Pages lined up with stories, and stories lined up with missing faces. No one called Rosie a liar anymore. No one called her a thief or worse. The paper and the voices together were stronger than threats. When the ground finally softened and frost let go, Jack built something small but steady, a simple arbor at the top of the hill behind the house. He set it near the sycamore where Rosie's life had been thrown away and then found. Suddy said that spot was right. "This is where she came back to us," she told anyone who asked, eyes shining. So that was decided. The wedding would be there. On the morning they married, the whole town rose early. People arrived with things to share. Faded quilts spread over grass. Strings of wildflowers looped along a rough wooden arch. 2 benches carved by the blacksmith's heavy hands. Even the preacher climbed the slope, Bible in one hand, cane in the other, breath puffing in the cool air. Rosie stood at the hill's base, breath caught in her chest. Her dress was plain ivory cotton, careful hand-stitching running along the seams. No lace, no long train, just honest work and clean lines. In the sunlight, it shimmered like a creek in spring. Her hair, braided down her back, needed no veil. She carried no old secrets, only the truth that had set her free. Suddy stood beside her, clutching a bundle of daisies and goldenrod. Her boots scuffed the dust, too excited to stay still. "Ready, Mama?" she asked, grinning so wide it looked like it might split her cheeks. "Yes, baby," Rosie said, her voice thick but steady. More than ready. They walked up together, hand in hand. Jack waited under the sycamore in his best shirt, hat held to his chest. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked only at Rosie, and his eyes stayed there. The preacher lifted his voice over the soft wind. "Marriage is not two perfect folks fitting like clockwork," he said. "It's two imperfect hearts promising to stand their ground when storms shout and rivers flood. It's the pledge to keep your place when the world tells you to run." He turned to Jack and then to Rosie. "Do you choose this bond, this life, this love?" "I do," Jack said without a shake. "I do," Rosie answered, and her voice didn't waver. "Then by the strength given me," the preacher said, "and by the truth you two have already lived, I pronounce you husband and wife." Jack stepped forward, cupped Rosie's cheek like it was something precious, and kissed her forehead. His voice came low and thick. "You didn't just make it through," he whispered. "You brought us back." Tears filled Rosie's eyes, not from fear this time, but from something warm that didn't hurt. Suddy cheered and flew into their arms. Laughter mixed with clapping. Some folks wiped at their eyes when they thought no one was watching. Others laughed softly, like they were trying not to scare off a shy animal. The wind swept over the grass and hummed like a hymn. That afternoon, the three of them rode down the slope together. Rosie sat behind Jack, arms around his middle, face against his shoulder. Suddy rode her little pony beside them, giggling. "Mama," she called, "race you to the gate." Rosie laughed, bright as the sunlight. "All right, sweetheart. Don't go easy on me." They kicked into a run, hooves thundering across the field, past fences and flower patches, cutting through the open land where love had taken root. The past had not vanished, but it no longer held the reins. Together they rode toward the next season, toward mornings not yet seen, toward gently rising hills that promised more than fear ever did. In the days that followed, life didn't slide into perfection. It settled into truth. Rosie learned the squeak in the back door could be fixed with a dab of oil. Jack learned that tea should steep a little longer for Rosie to smile into her cup. Suddy learned to braid clover chains and weave them around Rosie's wrist like a crown. The ranch learned their rhythm, the new beat of three people moving as one. Sometimes, when the light went gray and the air turned cold, old worry tried to creep back and curl up inside Rosie's chest. When that happened, Jack would place the blue handkerchief, his first small gift to her, into her palm. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. Suddy would climb onto Rosie's lap with a ragged doll pressed against both their hearts, and the quiet would hold them. People in town kept talking, but their words changed shape. Where there had been doubt, there was talk of courage. Where there had been sharp looks, there were nods. Mrs. Turner stopped by with a pot of stew and a loose, almost shy apology. Deputy Harmon tipped his hat whenever he rode past. Even the blacksmith's wife left a spare kettle on their porch with a note that said, "For boiling water when trouble comes." Rosie touched the handle like it was a medal. One crisp morning, Jack saddled Clover and his second mare, their coats brush bright. He led Rosie and Suddy to the sycamore. The bark was rough, the roots gnarled and deep. Rosie knelt in the shade and brushed dirt away from a patch she remembered in her bones. She reached into the earth, hands steady now, and lifted out the leather ledger that had once been too heavy to bear. Suddy watched with round eyes. "Is that the book, Mama?" "Yes," Rosie said. "It's the book that helped tell the truth." They wrapped it in cloth and carried it into town. The sheriff met them on the steps of the courthouse. He didn't look pleased. He looked careful, like a man who'd learned to listen. "This belongs with the record," Jack said. The sheriff nodded, took the book, and said, "It'll stay where folks can't lose it again." He paused, then added, "I'm sorry it took so long." Rosie dipped her head. Words weren't needed for that kind of moment. Suddy squeezed Rosie's hand, and the three of them walked out together. Spring rinsed the winter from the hills. Calves wobbled on new legs. Birds threaded twigs into nests beneath the eaves of the barn. Rosie found a rhythm in chores, the kind that moves you forward without rushing. She woke with Jack to feed the horses, warmed Suddy's hands around a cup in the cool mornings, and learned Clover's quiet preferences, like the exact spot behind her ear that made the mare sigh. Sometimes Rosie still woke with her heart racing, the orphanage fire burning in her dreams, the cellar walls pressing in. When that happened, she would step outside. The sky would open wide over the flats and pull the breath from her shoulders. Jack would follow, not touching, not crowding, just there, a steady shape in the dark. Suddy would shuffle out too, blanket trailing, and lean against Rosie's hip until the night lost its bite. On Sundays, they went to town. After church, folks stood in small knots, trading weather notes and seed prices. Children skipped along the boardwalk. The older woman with the silver braid, the one who had stepped forward on the day the lawmen came, always found Rosie's eyes and tipped her head. Once she handed Rosie a paper scrap folded twice. Inside was a single sentence, "When the truth hurts, hold on. It's cutting out the rot." Rosie tucked it into the blue handkerchief and kept it close. Letters arrived from Cheyenne and from the capital, stamped with seals, written in stiff words. They said the warden would stand trial. They said fines. They said sentences. They said the orphanage would be torn down and a new safe home built under different hands. The letters were heavy, but not like the book had been. These carried the weight of justice, not secrecy. One evening, as the sun slid low and the light went honeygold, Suddy tugged at Rosie's sleeve. "Tell me the story again," she said, "about the day we found you." Rosie sat Suddy on her lap and smoothed the child's hair back. "You say it better," Rosie whispered. Suddy puffed up a little and began. "Papa found a sack under the trees. I told him she was my mama. He brought you home. Everyone talked too much, but Papa said, 'Not until she speaks.' Then you woke up, and I whispered 'Mama' again until you heard it inside." Rosie smiled with wet eyes. "That's right," she said. "You saw me before I knew myself." Suddy leaned her head against Rosie's chest and listened to the quiet drum there. "I just knew," she murmured. "My heart told me." Jack came in from the yard, boots dusty, shirt sleeves rolled. He leaned his shoulder against the door frame and watched his girls, one small, one grown, folded together like they'd always been made that way. He didn't say he was grateful. He didn't have to. It was in the way he set his hat on the hook and put wood on the fire without asking. When the first real warmth of spring spread across the fields, the ranch felt like it was breathing deeper. Jack fixed the sagging rails along the fence line where he and Suddy had walked that morning months ago. Rosie painted the porch rail a fresh coat of white, neat strokes, careful hands. Suddy learned to skip rope and count to a new number every day until she lost track and laughed at herself. They went riding in the long evening light. Rosie sat straighter in the saddle now. Her leg, once done up in tight wraps, moved without that sharp flinch. Sometimes she pressed her knees and let the mare stretch. The wind lifted her hair. She would glance over at Jack, and he would glance back, a quick smile tugging his mouth, like a secret shared in daylight. From time to time, someone would mention Detective Finch, the one who'd come late at night with hard eyes and harder words. Jack always gave a short answer. The law had done its work. That was enough. Rosie didn't waste breath on people who wanted her small again. She had learned the difference between fear that warns and fear that lies. On a soft Sunday afternoon, the three of them climbed to the top of the hill. The arbor still stood, rough boards and flower twine now dried and faded. The sycamore leaves flickered. The gnarled roots held firm. Suddy set a daisy chain across the top rail and declared the hill their forever place. Rosie kissed her forehead. Jack put his hand around Rosie's and let silence do the talking. They didn't pretend the past had never existed. They carried it the way you carry a scar, tender, but proof you healed. When neighbors asked how they were, Rosie said, "We're all right." When someone pressed for more, Jack would tilt his head and say, "We're building." That was true in more ways than one: fences, trust, mornings, and the kind of life that lasts. On the day the willow by the paddock leafed out full and green, Suddy ran out waving a picture she'd drawn on a wood plank. It was 3 stick figures again, one tall, one medium with a braid, one little with a wide smile. Behind them stood a big tree with strong roots. "I added the sycamore," she said proudly. Rosie crouched and met Suddy's eyes. "You did good," she whispered, tracing each figure. "You did real good." That evening they rode together through the field as the sky went from gold to pink to purple. The land rolled open in front of them. The air smelled like new grass, and the horses settled into that easy rhythm that feels like freedom. Rosie laughed again, that bright note in her voice. Jack laughed too, a low sound that said he hadn't forgotten how. Suddy hooped and urged her pony to keep up. They passed the place where the sack had once lain, now covered in new leaves and light. They passed the ridge where Jack had hauled Rosie back from a cold, now a dark line, softened by grass. They passed the willow that marked the edge of their home. Everywhere they went, the land held pieces of their story, hard parts and soft ones, and knit them together. They didn't ride away from their past. They rode with it, and through it, and beyond it. If Rosie, Jack, and Suddy's journey reached you, if your heart jumped when Suddy whispered "Mama," or you felt that spark when Jack knelt in front of everyone, don't let the feeling fade when the screen goes dark. Tell us in the comments what moment grabbed you most. Tap that like button if you believe quiet bravery matters. And hit subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of unlikely love, steady courage, and second chances on the rugged frontier. We share the stories, but you're the ones who keep them alive. See you in the next ride.